last night, as you stated, Jacob Blake was shot in the back 7 times in front of his children. And let me be clear, this was not an accident. This wasn't bad police work. This felt like some sort of vendetta being taken out on a member of our community. The officer's deadly actions attempted to take a person's life in broad daylight. And like many of you, the video is etched into my mind, like so many other past videos that are just like it. It was a video that I would have rather not had to have watched. But the irony isn't lost on me that as Jacob Blake was actually trying to de-escalate a situation in his community, but the responding officer didn't feel the need to do the same. And now we all know Jacob Blake's name. And as I've said before, as we've all said before, this is familiar violence to too many of us, especially of those of us who are on the receiving end, whose communities have been over-policed, whose children learn early on that police officers aren't always serving and protecting them as they should. This didn't start with George Floyd, unfortunately. It's been around far longer than him, and if we don't do anything, this will continue as we saw yesterday. I would hate to see this not end with Jacob Blake. And that's why we have to respond. And we know that we can't remedy the white supremacy and the systemic racism that is built into all of our systems in just a couple years or with any package of legislation. But that doesn't mean we don't act. That doesn't mean that we stand still. We have to do everything that we can do within our power to first call out the systemic violence that happens every day in this state and in this country, and then do the work to rebuild those systems that perpetuate it, Not just when a black man is murdered in front of his children, but when schools that serve the same children are systemically underfunded, or when we see black women have to fight to be heard in our healthcare system, or when black communities are expected to live in more polluted communities, dealing with environmental hazards and toxins and contaminants. These too are forms of systemic violence. And the social and economic consequences of these deep-seated inequities, they reach every community across Wisconsin. That's why leaders at every level of government have an obligation to hear the demands for justice for those who are marching in the streets. You think after the past few months of people who are stepping up to demand justice that police departments, chiefs of police, even police unions will rush to implement some sort of reform. But that hasn't happened, or else you wouldn't have seen the actions that we all had to see last night. People's pain, anger, and frustration is a long overdue call to action. In June, the governor and I called on the legislature to bring some level of accountability and transparency into law enforcement. And we knew that this legislation would only be a first step towards justice, but that doing nothing is not an option. Unfortunately, our legislative leaders, the majority party, the Republicans in the legislature, although this is not political, these are facts, they have done nothing. And this is unfortunately what we as Wisconsinites, not we as the executive branch, not we as the Governor Evers administration, we as Wisconsinites have come to expect nothing anytime that we find ourselves in a time of crisis. The people of our state are done waiting for their leaders and their elected officials to show up. And so are we. And as the governor said, true leaders, they do the work that has to be done. True leaders do the work that people demand of them, especially when it's hard. So I sincerely hope for the people all across Wisconsin that we see some leadership from our legislature in the coming days. As I said before, doing nothing is not an option. This is not something that you can just sit on your hands or bury your head in the sand in. To everybody that is as tired as I am, know that I stand with you in this fight for a better world, a world where black lives actually matter, a world with decency, a world with true justice, a world full of equity and opportunity for all people, for black people who have been dealt a bad hand far too many times. And remember that these things are always worth fighting for. So I want to remind people to please take care of yourselves. Please stay safe. Join me in praying for Jacob Blake and his family, and join me in fighting to make sure that this does not ever happen again. Thank you so much.